Our distinguished speaker this evening is Nelson Evans, a 1964 Upper Iowa University alum. Originally from Chicago, Nelson came to Upper Iowa for a great education and to play in the UIU football team. After graduation, Nelson became the first African-American teacher in Cedar Rapids, Iowa School District. He continued in education, serving as a teacher, principal, director of schools, and positively impacting education everywhere he went. Nelson has received numerous awards and recognitions, including being inducted into the Iowa African American Hall of Fame in 1997. We are honored to have Nelson on campus with us today to share his message. Before we invite Nelson to speak, please note the following message. This evening, there will be refreshments and an opportunity to walk around to displays in the back of the ballroom. You can see that over there. And to learn more about African Americans who have positively impacted humanity. Without no further ado, let us invite him with a great pickup welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that introduction. I must say that this is truly a pleasure and an honor for me to be here speaking to you. I was so excited when I received the call from Steve that they were even thinking about or considering me to be one of your guest speakers here. But again, I am so pleased and honored to be here to do this. As I stated, I came here to Cedar Rapids in 1960. Yeah, I'm old, but it's a good thing. I came here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa from Chicago, Illinois. A young man growing up on the south side of Chicago in a segregated area, but it was good to me and I loved it and I enjoyed it. I came here because a friend of mine who went to the same school that I went to, DuSable, had come and talked to me about coming to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I had had offers and contacts from other schools, New Mexico to mention one, Northwestern to mention another, which is right there in Chicago, Illinois. Excuse me. But Hutch convinced me that coming to Upper Iowa would be a good thing because it was far enough from home that I wasn't going to get home every night and be running with the fellas every night and all that kind of good stuff. But it was also close enough that if I needed to get home, I could get home on the weekend. So I came here sight unseen, going to love Iowa and hang out with Hutch and the rest of the fellas. Such a rude awakening I was in for. I should have known that something was wrong when I couldn't get a plane or take a train into Fayette, Iowa. Being the first child to graduate and the only boy, my sisters all thought that I was going to be the cool man on campus. They had me all laid out with the best wear and shoes and stuff, so I had a couple of suitcases of the finest wear, and I knew I was sharp. I was going to be the best dressed man on campus. So I packed up my bags, caught the bus in Chicago, Illinois, and headed for Fayette, Iowa. Well, when I arrived here, it was early on in the fall, and as you most know, football players always arrive early before anybody else is on campus. The bus station was right on Main Street, and there was a drugstore called Daniel's Store, and that's where, you know, they let you off and all that kind of good stuff. So I got off and I had all my grips taken off and stuff like that, and I'm standing around in a bus takeoff, and I'm standing here on Main Street all by my lonesome. Then I looked around and there were Fayette people walking up and down the street, and white folks, if you will, and they're looking at me, and I'm a brother from the south side of Chicago in a culture where there's nothing but white, and I've been indoctrinated just like anybody else. And what is all these white folks and what they gonna do to me out here in Iowa? And so they were very nice and very cordial. May we help you? May we help you? May we help you? And my response was, no, you may not. No, you may not. No, you may not. So I stood there and waited, and they proceeded to pass by, and passed by, and I'm standing there and I'm looking around and perusing around, and the station wagon pulls up across the street. And this lady gets out and she comes across the street and she said, "May I help you?" And I said, "No, you may not." And so she said, "My name is Mrs. Richards." And I said, "Oh, you must be the coach's wife." And she said, "Yes, I'm George Richards' wife." And I said, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you." And she said, "We're so happy to see you." She said, "Let me take you to the campus." And so I got my grip and thinking, we walk off and I put my, my grip in her car and we take off going to the campus. I've never seen the campus before again, never been in Fayette. We go down about a quarter of a block, turn left and go a block, and she pulls up to, at that time, it was Malt B. McCosh. It was a brand new building. And she said, "We're on campus." I guess I must have slid down in that seat like you couldn't believe. And so as we began to go into the Malt B and I'm getting squared away, she asked me the question. She said, "If I may ask," she said, "what were you waiting for?" And I told her I didn't want to answer. And she said, "Well, it's not that bad, is it?" I said, "Yes, it is." So she said, "What are you waiting for?" And I said, "I'm waiting for a cab." And she looked at me like, like she was really trying to cover her face, you know. And you probably need to know that for my first year, that was a joke. "Hey, Nelson, you waiting for a cab? Hey, Nelson, you waiting for a cab?" So that was my introduction coming here to Fayette and talking about culture shock. Here again, a brother coming from the south side of Chicago, here to Fayette, Iowa. It's really great coming here and taking a look around to see what has happened to this school in 50 years. And obviously, the physical changes are just so impressive. And I think that the administration and you students to be so proud of what you've accomplished here in terms of the physical development of this campus and the physical plan as to how it has grown, and it is absolutely gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. Excuse me just a moment. One of the things I hope to do during this brief conversation I'd like to have with you is that I would like to hopefully raise your awareness and sensitivity to issues that impact African American economic status, social status, cultural status, and political status. And as I talk about these things, I'm in hopes that maybe in the Q&A, there might not be some things I would cover, but in the Q&A session, I hope we're going to be able to talk more about those things. But again, my goal is hopefully to raise your level of awareness and sensitivity to issues that are still impacting African Americans and their development. As an African American educator, and I've always considered myself as a teacher, I found that when I arrived in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, as the first African American to be hired by the Cedar Rapids Community School District, I was amazed at how I was embraced and loved, because I taught at at a school that was basically where all the minority kids went to. I never will forget, I'm in my classroom and my back is turned, and I've always been little late on getting up bulletin boards because I was also meticulous about my bulletin boards. And I could hear the kids coming up the stairs, and my back was to them, and I could hear all this commotion going on in the back, and the thing that kept coming across was, "He's black, he's black, he's black, he's black." And when I turned around and looked, I looked into the face of a bunch of beautiful minority kids looking at me, just a grinning. And if nothing else, that was a thing that really kind of set me on the road to really my profession that I loved, and wanting to be all that I could be as an educator in instilling and changing the lives of kids. As an educator, And especially when you begin to talk about the month of February, I was in a position at that time that African American History Month in February was a month that we were expected to teach about African American history. My colleagues, whether they be teacher, whether they be parents, whether they be other adults, always ask me the question, why is it so important and why are y'all so important that you guys have to have a whole month set aside for y'all? What is it that's so important about y'all that y'all got a whole month set aside to talk about your contributions or what you've done or what you haven't done? And you know, I thought about it, and my response was the best that I could do, and I still think that it is correct. And I got it from a documentary that was done by Bill Cosby, and it was called African American History: Lost, Strayed, Stolen, and Distorted. And that was my response to those adults. That's the reason why we have a month set aside to talk about African American history. Because in truth, that is exactly what has happened to our history. And even today, it continues to happen. Again, our history being lost, strayed, stolen, and or distorted. Then when I got in the classroom, there were a number of my babies that I would get ready and talked about African history and kind of get them pumped up for it. And like as an educator, you know, when you begin to present a class, you always try to develop what we call an anticipatory set for your kids so they can get ready for the new learning that's about to occur. And I would talk to my babies about, we're going to talk about African American history, and I found that they really weren't very interested in it. And finally I talked to a couple of schools. I said, what's up with y'all not into this thing? This is about y'all. And a couple of my kids, and as I look back on this, I'm saying, like, those kids had some insight and they knew what was going on from Jump Street. They said, Mr. Evans, who wants to talk about being a slave? Who wants to talk about being out in somebody's cotton field? Who wants to talk about, yes, sir, Mr. Charlie, and yes, sir, and no, you can't, and you getting your hands cut off, or somebody selling your, who wants to talk about that? It made perfect sense to me. And then I began to tell the babies, well, wait a minute, I got to come from this from a different perspective. Again, as I stated, our history being what? Lost, strayed, stolen, and or distorted. I said, did you know that where you came from before you were a slave, you were a free man? You were kings and queens. Do you know your homeland, Africa, is known as the cradle of civilization? Do you know that they have things that your people built, like pyramids, that are so wonderfully built back doing years ago, that today with all the modern science and technology that they still can't reproduce that? Did you know that? Did you know that the father of medicine was an African by the name of Imhotep? Did you know that? And then I began to, again, that was my anticipatory set. That was me getting ready for the kids. And I want to know about this, because I came from some good stuff. I wasn't just a slave. But beforehand, that's what they had been presented with. Or the other images that they had been presented with was not that they could feel comfortable about, feel good about, feel proud about. If I may. As I stated, coming to Fayette, coming to Cedar Rapids, I always look back on that and I feel extremely blessed, because here in Fayette, it was so few of us here, because back during the 60s, there were only 10 African American males here and only 3 girls. But one of the things we used to do in the Iowa conference, because there were so few of us here, we used to go from different colleges like Central, like Central, Simpson, Iowa, the University of Iowa. On certain weekends, we would go there so we could get some cultural interaction with our own, if you will. And we would hit those on weekends. Well, it just so happened the month before I was to graduate, it was in the spring, and we were going to go to the University of Iowa just to go to hang out. And we always stayed in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And my roommate, one of my roommates who had graduated the year before, his name was Wardell Diggs. Wardell Diggs lived in Cedar Rapids, but at that time, Cedar Rapids was known as a community and a reputation that did not hire African Americans. Wardell, in order to live in Cedar Rapids and in order to teach, he had to teach in Anamosa, the prison, which was about 20 miles right down the road, if you will. But we stayed with Wardell. At any rate, to make a long story short, we was hanging out and went to University of Iowa and hung out where there was a large African American population. But we all kind of liked the city of Cedar Rapids. And we all decided that we would submit our application. My application was the only one that was received and admitted, if you will. And I always felt as though because of their short-sightedness and their inability to recognize quality, they lost out on a lot, because every one of us that was in that car have all went on to make our mark, if you will, in society and to be a contributor. Excuse me. As I stated, Wardell is now Dr. Diggs. Herb Hill is now a well-known attorney in Aurora, Illinois. Frank Lipsum is a journalist and for a Chicago paper. I say I've done my own thing here, so I feel relatively that I've done a fairly decent job. But if I may digress a little bit and going back to talk about this month of February and why it is so important for us to recognize this month as African American History Month and what it needs to and what needs to happen. As I stated before, our history has always been lost, strayed, stolen, or distorted. And one of my colleagues finally had the nerve to say, well, why did that have to be done? Or why was that way? Or why did folks feel as though they had to do that to y'all? Well, it's pretty simple, if you will. Because at that time, the colonists were in a position that they were trying to build a new country, if you will. They needed people to work. And they all knew very much so, too, that they not only needed laborers, but they also needed people that had some intelligence, if you will. They had enough sense to know, too, that on the African continent, all the things that they were needed in terms of manpower, intellectual power, was on that continent. But in the same light, how did they get it? They get it by kidnapping and stealing people from their homes and families and their motherland and bringing them here. And so in the effort to do that and say that, well then, why did they do that? This is the reason for doing that is because this is what they needed. We were in the process of building a strong country. And we do right now have a strong country. But then let's go a little bit further in that, talking about why did they do that? Because the reason that if you're going to turn somebody into a slave, there are a number of things that must be done in order to do that. There was a gentleman back in that time, and some of you, have any of you ever heard of Willie Lynch? Some of you got your hand up if you know about it. Willie Lynch was a bad white boy. He was a bad white boy that knew his social science. And he had a plantation in the West Indies. And in 1712, Willie Lynch came to the James River here in the United States and got together with the plantation owners and say, y'all got problems with y'all slaves. I got the remedy for it as to how you can control them. I'll tell you. And he set about a plan that still is in effect today. That plan was, if you can make those people feel less than about themselves, distrust themselves, distrust each other, look to you for everything they need, going to be, will be, and ever be, you will control them from today and centuries going forward. What did they do? They depicted African Americans as being less intelligent. I'm sorry, I'm on a dry box tonight. But again, hopefully you guys are hanging in there with me. How did they depict them? As being less intelligent, less courageous, less loyal, less spiritual. And when you can do that to a people, it's easy, and get others of your ilk to believe in what you're saying. It's easy for you to do those kinds of things to other individuals if you see them as being less than. If you see them as being an animal, not a human being, not only do you take away their humanity, but you take away your own in doing so. That's why it was so easy for the slaves to be treated the way they were, because they set those things in motion to drive the ideas, the interests, and the other of what you might call at that time, maybe they were, until this plan was put into place. Good white folk who had good hearts, who still had a sense of their own humanity. But this plan was put about in order to change their mind so they could control those individuals that they needed for helping to develop this country in terms of what they wanted to do. And again, it was, what can we do, and how did they do it, and what contributions have they made? Well, let me tell you something. And I'll just run out a few, because when you do that, it kind of minimizes what they're doing. Every time you pull up to a stoplight, you know who you need to think about? An African American. An African American was the one who invented that. As white as sugar is, a black man is up in that sugar. He was part of an individual who helped to refine sugar, that it made it less expensive for it to be refined, and making it economically possible where they got lots more money, if you will, in terms of the development of it. The same thing that happened to the cotton gin. African American, quite sure you've heard of Thomas Edison. Everybody's heard about him. Look at all these beautiful shiny lights that we have in front of us, so you're able to see and all that kind of good stuff. But what you did not know, yeah, he invented the light. But did you know that that little filament that goes in there that burns brightly, he could not develop a filament that could withstand the heat. And it burned out, so it wasn't economically feasible to do it. Guess who the person was who developed the filament that could stand the heat? That sounds like the character of my culture, my people. It was a brother. It was a brother. Had to come up with that kind of thing, could stand the heat. Then, of course, you walk, every time you step in your shoes, it's a brother inside your shoes. Back in the day, in terms of the shoe companies they could develop a great top. The sole was tight and all that, but they had a real problem in terms of stitching the sole to the top. Guess who invented something to do it? It's called the last. And do you know that same machine is still in use today, a shoe last? It was a brother. We're in the process of, as I stated before, building a country. What was one of the main things that took us across this country and helped to open up the West? The railroad. During that time, the railroad was part of making this country what it is. As the railroad traveled back and forth, they had lots of problems with breakdowns and things of that nature, because it was steel on steel. Oil needed to be applied to those moving parts. The trains were not able to move fluently. Every so often, an engineer had to come, or a conductor had to get off, get the oil cans, go and oil those parts. A brother developed an oil cup that, when those machines moved, those moving parts were being able to dip in the oil. And as a result of that, the train moved fluently for a long period of time without doing that. His name was Matthew McCoy. Brother McCoy also invented some things that during that time, working for the railroad, that it was also a very dangerous job. You've seen those couplings on a train where they back up and when they couple together. Back in those days, that had to be done manually. Lots of lives were lost. Body parts were distorted and disfigured because they get caught in it. He developed an automatic coupling device that did it. I'm just talking about from a perception of being less intelligent in terms of just a few things that African American, and that's why I'm hesitant about giving these few examples like that, because it seems to minimize. Not mentioning, I couldn't almost possibly begin to talk about all the other contributions that they made in terms of inventions and things of that nature. Well, you know what? I just thought about something. I'm talking about all these marvelous engineering things that have been developed by African Americans and basically identified men. But I'm here to say I got a daughter that is an electrical engineer for John Deere. My daughter has patents from John Deere. So when you talk about what we have done from an intellectual standpoint, I'm talking about folks that happened way back then, but I'm talking about my daughter is kicking it right now. And I'm so proud. Early on, I talked about the father of medicine, Imhotep. Back during the Egyptian time, what was known as the father of medicine. The first successful open heart surgery was done by an African American in Chicago. He did it in a hospital called Providence. I'm old. As a kid, I was serviced at Providence Hospital. It has now been torn down. During the Second World War, we had a number of our soldiers that died as a result of not being able to get blood transfusions because they were not able to keep the blood, if you will, pure enough and ready enough, wholesome enough and sustained enough that they could have it and ready to use on the battlefield. A guy by the name of Charles Drew developed a process where you could, of blood plasma, save countless numbers of lives. So when you talk about being as they depicted us, and again, the clarification of our history, and I'm talking about being lost, strayed, or stolen, and you looking at us as, what y'all done? What y'all did? Being less intelligent, less courageous. We have fought in every war that this country has had for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I don't know how many of you are aware that the first life that was lost at the Boston Tea Party was an African American. His name was Crispus Attucks. First, for that thing that we hold so dear, but yet and still we wanted to keep it from other folks other than Europeans. And as I said, we fought in every war that this country has had. And we fought bravely, with courage, and we continue to do that. How many of you have ever heard of the Tuskegee Airmen? I see some hands that are going up. Well, and that's cool. Y'all can inform the others about what they were all about. But you're talking about a legacy of courage, tenacity, in the face of all others. These men flew flights. They were airmen. World War II, they were losing bombers and pilots like they were flies. Because the fighter planes, to protect those big bombers, they did not do it very well. They were always losing those bombers coming back or going. These African American fighters were called red tails. Many of you have probably seen that movie. And talking about, their record, any crew that they took out, they never lost a bomber. Talk about courage, talk about loyalty, talk about great patriotism. But yet and still, we were painted as being, as I stated before, less intelligent, less loyal, less spiritual, if you will. But the real record is, if you look at the real record, it's there for everybody to see and for everybody to understand. But I have stated as to how things have changed here on campus, if you will, and I'm thought, and it takes my mind back right now to Charles Dickinson when he talked about the book and read the book, if you will, The Best and Worst of Times, The Tale of Two Cities. I almost feel as though we're living in that kind of thing. Right now it's the best and worst of times, if you will, as a people, as a country, and especially as African Americans. As I indicated, I started school here in the 60s. And what was going on back in the 60s? Y'all wouldn't even a gleam in y'all daddy's eye back then. But I can tell you what was going on. We were still being denied the right to vote. Unemployment for us was 3 times that of our white counterparts. Housing, we still could not live where we would like to live if we had the money to do it. When you look at what was going on back then, but then I look at those are the kinds of things that was going on back then in my life 50 years ago. But in the same light, I was able to come to good old Upper Iowa University. There were a lot of other things that was going on in my community, if you will, where we were pulled together tightly, if you will. And then in 1964, Lyndon Johnson said he was going to declare war on poverty. Also, we had the 1964 voting right. And you know, I could be wrong, but this is a theory I have in mind. I really feel that when that occurred, we lost something. Because in our community, it was almost felt like, hey, we got it. We got the vote. We can go, basically, a lot of things open up for us. We were able to go in other communities that we wanted to. Basically, we had the money, we could do it. There were laws put into place about discrimination against hiring practices. The right to vote, as I stated before, was opened up. And what did we do? Again, we've been impacted by Willie Lynch too. We felt as though our stuff wasn't good enough. We left our communities. We moved out to white folks' communities. We moved out to other, and what happened to our communities? They kind of died on the vine, if you will. I remember when our communities were so tight, as I stated before, if you touched one fiber in that quilt, the whole community quivered. We had lawyers, doctors, teachers. And it used to be said, and you've heard people, especially my age, boy, Miss Sally down the road could whoop your if you got out of place. It was true. You try to do that today to somebody's kid, correct them. You got a lawsuit, or you got, if you understand, that has been lost. That culture of sharing with your own, understanding your own, and making sure that your own has the understanding of who they are and what they are, and we're going to make sure that you do that and you be that. But we lost that to some extent. Excuse me here again. As time has gone on, I would have to say, it's amazing to me as to how, and as you guys live on, and I hope you live a good long life, you'll find that it's amazing as to how things stay the same, but yet still things change. As I gave you that example in terms of what was going on back then, and what was happening back then, but also as to how things have changed, look and see what's going on today in our society. What's happening with our voting rights laws? They're being attacked. There are all sorts of things put afoot to deny voting procedures, to object and to hinder people voting. The same kind of practices that Willie Lynch put into place in terms of not appreciating the soul, if you would, of the African American and the contributions that we have as a people and that we have made as a country is being started right now. I told you about all the contributions that we've made and things of that nature. And I say, why would you do that? Why again? Here again, I minored in psych, and one of the things I found that for people that do that to another people, making them feel less than, something's wrong with that individual that's doing that. For a community, for a group that does that to another group of people, that is something wrong when you've got to make others feel less than in order to make you feel whole or make you feel better. If we're living in a society like that, or if you're living in a group like that, You need to check yourself. And as I stated before, it's amazing as to how some things have changed and some things remain the same. And when I say that how there's a group that want to make us look less than, the most powerful man in this country is who? Say it again. Say it, girl. President. Our president. He is an African American. What's happening to him, y'all? What has been happening to him in terms of depicting him as being less than, not one of us? When he was elected as the President of the United States, the same night they was having his inaugural ball, the Republican leadership of Congress was meeting in a hotel across town in Washington, D.C. And guess what they were doing? They were devising a plan the first night as to how we'd bring him down. Now, I'm not lying to y'all. You can read this. How many of y'all know about that? Okay, yeah, there's some of y'all that are knowledgeable about that. The first night, Mitch McConnell, and he even announced it. He said our number one goal, not jobs, because we were in a recession state. We were losing I don't know how many jobs when he came on. Not jobs, not working together. Our first objective is to do what? See, he's a one-time president, and they proceeded to do so. Everything he has tried to do. Have we ever had any other president that had to show his birth certificate? What is that about? He's not one of us. You even have the audacity of Ted Nugent saying that our president is a mongrel. Have we ever had any other president in terms of depicting, tearing him down, making you feel that he's less than? He's not one of us. He's not my president. But it's that small group that's doing that. But the larger society, you guys have to recognize what's going on and say, But in reality, America did do that. America elected President Barack Obama not once, but twice. But again, you still got to recognize that these kinds of things are still afoot. And when you see them raise their ugly head, you need to be ready to chop it off. And you still need to maintain your humanity and seeing what's happening to humanities of others and minorities. One of the things I can say in terms of cultural values and how they are, excuse me. Again, one of the things I said I wanted to do is raise your level of awareness and sensitivity to issues that not only impact minorities, but they also impact you as majority. Just think for a moment, if Barack Obama had have had the support, I'm talking about just a minimal support of Congress, where we might be today. Just think about that, though, really. When I think about what they're doing and what they've done, I think it's treason. They'd rather see this country go down than to let this man have success. Every bill that he's put forth as a jobs bill, no dice. And they keep saying what he hasn't done. The auto industry would be gone, dead. What did they say? No, don't do it. He did it, and what happened? We have an auto industry that's thriving, doing well. The healthcare issue. And I know I may be on my kind of words, but that's all right, because it's coming out all right. They don't even have a plan. We're the only country in the world. We got the highest medical costs, but probably one of the worst medical systems in the world. But what they want to do, keep it the status quo, where the big insurance companies still maintain and get their profits. But what do they say? Obamacare is not worth it. We need to repeal it. What? And those of you that are students, y'all need to know what's going on with that too. Because with that, you guys are able to stay on your mama's and daddy's insurance until at least you're 26. If it weren't for him, you would have to fend for yourself. You went out here as cold as it is to slip on some ice and bust your behind and, Mom and Dad, I got to go to, all right, go to the insurance company number such and such and such. And every way this man has been depicted as being less than, less intelligent. But while you're here at Upper Iowa, and as a minority, and as a group of people, being in a situation that hopefully you will begin to see and examine and raise your level of awareness of cultural differences and see where those ugly issues come up, where you're seeing others are being made to feel less than, others are being made to feel not part of. I witnessed that here in good old Upper Iowa back in 1960. But one of the things I can say, that there were some folks here that made us feel part of the culture, part of Upper Iowa, and supported us and helped us go through. At the risk of not mentioning everybody that I need to mention, I just have to mention a few. Dean Gill, Roger Boyd, George Richards, Charles Clark. These were all, like you say, for good old white folk. Or like we said, good white folk. Who saw what was in, but also there were some other students who had an opportunity to see and understand our culture, wanted to share the culture, and wasn't afraid of interacting with others. Or like one of the students that we had a conversation with today at our table, was able to step out of their comfort zone and understand and see what that other person was going through and make that other person feel comfortable with being a part of. I challenge you guys today, in terms of being Upper Iowa students, that you still have the ability to do that, because even more so than what we did back then, I am amazed at the diversity that you guys have on this campus. I am absolutely, and I think it is great. I think it is beautiful. But the opportunity that you guys have to influence policy, political issues, world issues with all these kids that are coming from here, there, elsewhere, that you have the ability to interact with these kids, see what our culture is like in terms of being open, giving, receiving, accepting. When you see others that are feeling less than, do you try to feel, enable them or help them to feel somebody? Or do you encourage that or that effort to make them feel less than? So I guess that I would say to you, and the charge that I would like to leave to you this evening, is that you see what's going on in our political system, raising your level of awareness in terms of and sensitivity of these issues that you guys are dealing with, political issues that are not addressing the issues that our culture and what we're supposed to be about, that of human beings that we see that have opportunities to this thing that we say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When you see that happening, and when you see others that are feeling less than or they don't belong, do you reach out to them? Do you try to make them feel better? And like I said before, you guys have a great chance here in terms of the diversity that I see in this campus. Kids that are coming from all over. Because when they leave here, they can go back and say, yeah, them Americans, they full of, or they're only about their own stuff. But on the other hand, they can say, those Americans, they're wonderful. They were open, they helped me. They helped me get this far. They weren't about seeing what they could do to make me feel less than. So I guess in closing, I would want to hope that you would think about those kinds of things, but more than that, some other things that are happening right now that I hope that you're aware of And again, like I said, for what's going on in this country right now with the haves and the have-nots, those at a certain party, if you will, and I just got to, these are just my biases, and I can't help it. What they're doing to, again, those that have less than. We have the greatest disparity that has ever been in this country. 1% of our country has 85% of the wealth. 1%. Minority jobs, African American males, is 4 times at the rate of their white counterparts. Support for an African American president who is doing everything he can to bring this country and make it everything that he could, what it could be, is being fought on every hand. You're bright kids. I know you're being provided with a great education here, but one of the things I want you to think, but I want you to think beyond what's affecting and what do you have to do? You got to vote, you got to talk, you got to interact with others. So my charge with you this evening as I close, and probably we can get more into our Q&A time, that's my charge I want to put to you guys. Have an open heart. Have an open mind. Be receptive to others. And when you see that ugly head of prejudice and bigotry raise up, challenge it. Because that's the way it gets away a lot of times. Ain't nobody saying nothing. So it does what it wants to do. And say, not on my watch. So, with that, I'm going to close and say, again, I am so proud and so happy to have been invited here to my alma mater. After being here 50 years ago, a brother from the south side of Chicago being asked to come back to his alma mater college, if you will, to speak. So with that, thank you. God bless you. Before I go on too, I'd like to say something, or at least I'd like to introduce some people that came here with me today. My daughter, Alice, and my son, Nelson. And my grandson. I think we have time for Q&A. And also, I've kind of talked myself out, but hey, I got a backup here with my daughter and son, and so they might chime in at any time. Questions? Oh, this is good. We're going to get home early tonight. Let's go. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation. I have a question. You mentioned a number of colleagues went to Cedar Rapids with you. I think you mentioned the last name, Dixon, Dave.
Yes, sir.
Are you still in touch with these individuals?
Absolutely.
I need to talk to you after.
Okay, we get together every year. Go to the Drake Relays and we come up here. And like I said, we get together and we really enjoy. You know, one other thing, I talk about us as being African Americans and as to how we make it. And I say, good white folk, there is somebody else that's part of our group. He's not African American, but I consider him as a brother. He's a white young man that went to school with us. His name is Fred Tully. Fred Tully was a white boy that taught me that soul did not connote to color. That soul was a matter of your experiences and what you've gone through and how you relate to others. And so I consider Fred as being another brother because he was showing us down. And again, like I said before, I often thought when I came here is that when you talked about soul, it had to be color. But Fred taught me, it's about what's here. What's your experience? What's your heart about? What is your humanity about? Other questions? Yes.
We talk about leaving people out of the mix and one thing that we need to turn our attention to is, and maybe you can speak on it, is what's going on with the LGBT community as well, because there have been a lot of prejudices towards this community, I guess would be the word for it. And it's kind of similar to what has happened in the past with African Americans, and wanting to leave them out of the mix and have laws against them. What would you say to anyone?
What I would say is that, did you guys understand her question? Is there a mic that we can give to her? She was saying what's going on with the LGBT community. And because they're in the same place, basically, if you will, as minorities when they were put in a position of feeling less than. I think what is going on and what is happening, if you are aware and if you're being made to understand what's going on, like I said, for raise your level of awareness and sensitivity to these issues, there was a law that was put before the governor in Arizona, and I think that most of you are aware of that, if you're staying up with current events. And that what it says, that on the basis of somebody's religion, belief, that they could deny service to a gay individual. Now, it was fraught with all sorts of weaknesses in the whole nine yards, but it was just a cover, if you ask me, to hide their bigotry. But the deal of it is, it didn't pass, and Governor Brewer vetoed it, and she said because of what she had seen in terms of, she had talked to others and things of that nature. But I really do believe it was a political move in terms of why she vetoed it. But I also believe that it was other folk who got together and put political and economic pressures on them. And said that if you do this, well, basically they didn't say that, but some of our major corporations that service Arizona said that we are not for this, and if you do that, there will be financial consequences for you. And it did not pass. But what happened? Folks were aware, they were sensitive, and they banded together and said no. So in other words, you got to stay aware of what's afoot. Well, thank you so very much. And again, I am just so honored and happy and pleased that I was asked to come back to Upper Iowa to be one of their speakers. Thank you so much, guys.
First of all, thank everyone for coming out here, and special thanks to Nelson, class of '66, which this is very exciting. Anytime we get a hero like this to come back to the campus, we're always proud. And to see Nelson come here into success, first of all, of course, we've got to give him the pennant. He's got to leave with a pennant, right? So I want to get a picture. Come on over here.
Okay.
You're going to get your pennant to take back. All right. And I also want to... Okay.
Aww.
I also want to mention, and you all know from the inauguration, we talk about the mantra of the university, university first, people always, but also there's a motto, and I'm going to give Nelson a coin from the inauguration. On that motto is changing lives one student at a time. And I think if you really listen to what he said, and let's go back to what he said. He stood in that classroom and he heard people saying, he's black, and I could envision you turning around and etched in your mind for the rest of your life the impact you felt, and you knew the responsibility. And I guess what I'm saying here is we all have the opportunity to change lives and to impact lives. And the impact you make, you'll never know how many generations it'll go on far beyond you're gone. And I'd just like to give one last round of applause for Nelson, who's changed so many lives.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And here, I'm going to give you this coin here. Oh. There. We'll take one more. There. Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much.
Again, thank you so much, and God bless.